Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into a story many of you probably think you know really well.
Yeah, it's been everywhere for years, hasn't it?
Exactly. The headlines, the public image. It's all been Vijay Mallya,
Yeah.
the king of good times, this flamboyant billionaire, now mostly seen as, well, the fugitive.
The guy who owes thousands of crores fled India.
Hmm.
That's the picture. A powerful narrative, definitely very charged.
It really is. It's saturated the media, public opinion in India especially, that image of excess
Mm-hmm.
and the crash, the huge debts.
And that number, the 9,000 crore, which is what, over $1 billion US, it just sticks in your mind, represents this huge financial mess. And for many, wrongdoing.
Right. That's the dominant story, the
Yeah.
accepted version. But what if there's more to it?
Another side.
Yeah, what if it's not quite so black and
Mhm.
white? Just a rich guy looting banks and running off. That's the twist, the, let's say, less heard angle we're digging into today.
Mhm.
Because Vijay Mallya himself, he actually made a rare, really extensive public appearance recently. A long, detailed interview. A kind of tell-all.
Ah, right. I saw reports about that. A direct challenge to the usual story.
A very direct, very pointed challenge. And crucially, our deep dive today, it isn't based on, like, rumors or just random speculation.
Yeah, it's grounded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's built on that specific public appearance by Mallya, his own words, his claims from that interview. Plus, and this is important, specific facts and figures from our source material that are actually backed up by official reports, even government statements.
So we're looking at his perspective, but supported by verifiable details where possible.
Precisely. So our mission for you today is clear. We're going to unpack this counter-narrative. Mallya's side, as he presents it in this source, point by point.
Looking at the specific claims he makes, the details he offers.
Yeah, and seeing what complexities, what alternative views emerge when you look past the screaming headlines. It's about understanding it from his angle, strictly based on this material. We're not here to judge, not endorsing anything, just exploring the details he put out there.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where should we start? Maybe with setting the stage. The two narratives side by side.
Perfect. Let's lay them out clearly. So, on one side, you've got the common view, the one we've touched on.
The dominant one.
Right. Mallya as this deliberate criminal, a fugitive billionaire, willfully defaulted on massive loans, that near a 9,000 crore figure again.
Accused of fleeing specifically to dodge the law. Looting public banks. Leaving thousands of Kingfisher Airlines employees high and dry, no salaries.
That's the belief, yeah. Fueled by, well, years of media coverage and understandable public anger.
And it taps into something deeper, doesn't it? Concerns about accountability, especially for the rich and powerful. Seeing a billionaire seemingly get away with it while ordinary people struggle, it makes people angry. Easy to see him as the villain.
Absolutely. A very straightforward story of crime and getting away with it.
Okay.
But then you have Mallya's core counter-narrative,
Yeah.
the one he lays out in this interview.
Okay.
And first off, he doesn't deny Kingfisher Airlines failed. He acknowledges it. Big time. And he expresses regret for the impact. That's a really key starting point for his side.
The source actually quotes him apologizing directly to the Kingfisher employees. He says, "I am deeply sorry that some of them didn't get paid. I take full responsibility for the airline's operational failure, specifically."
So he owns the business failure itself. He's not running from that.
No, he seems to accept that part.
And this is the huge divergence, he absolutely denies criminal intent, vehemently denies theft, looting, any malicious plan.
So what's his explanation then? If not crime.
His argument, as he puts it, is that his downfall wasn't criminal behavior, but the result of, well, he calls it a complex web of business challenges, policy hurdles, and legal inconsistencies.
Okay, so external factors, systemic issues, not just him.
That's his claim. He wants you to see it as a business failure. Yeah, a big one. But one massively compounded by things outside his direct control, global events, political interference, problems in the Indian system itself. Not a simple crime story.
And that distinction is crucial for his whole argument, isn't it? Failed businessman, yes, he accepts that label to a degree, but criminal, absolutely not, in his view.
Exactly. And this whole deep dive, based on this source, is about exploring that specific perspective, unpacking the details he uses to argue his case.
We're laying out his argument, supported by the facts cited in the material. Got it.
Okay, so with those two narratives clear, let's dive into the main event, the Kingfisher story. But through the lens of Mallya's counter-narrative, the business realities as he describes them.
Right. Kingfisher Airlines, launched 2005, big splash, luxury image, top service, new planes, a premium brand.
And it seemed to work initially. By 2011, really fast, actually. It was the second biggest domestic airline in India, a major player.
Huge market share. It definitely shook things up. But the source does note, even then, even during that growth, it was piling up heavy losses, heavy debt.
Yeah, that's important context. And a really big turning point, which Mallya highlights in his account, was that aggressive expansion. Specifically, buying the low-cost carrier Air Deccan in 2007.
Ah, yes, the Air Deccan deal. Why did he say he did that again?
His stated reason was strategic. It was about getting international flying rights fast. Indian rules back then, you needed a certain amount of domestic operation first. Buying Air Deccan was supposedly a shortcut to get that history and scale needed for international routes.
A shortcut, but one that came with baggage.
Huge baggage, according to the source, and Mallya seems to acknowledge this in hindsight. Air Deccan was losing a lot of money, deeply unprofitable, and the due diligence, maybe the integration after the purchase, it was apparently lacking.
So you bolt a loss-making, low-cost operation onto your high-cost premium model. Sounds difficult.
A very difficult marriage, as many said. And the timing could not have been worse.
Right, because almost immediately after that deal closed.
Bang. The 2008 global financial crisis hits. Everything freezes up.
And at the same time, fuel prices went through the roof. Unprecedented highs. The entire aviation industry worldwide was just hammered. Airlines everywhere were bleeding cash, cutting flights. Many went bust.
And Kingfisher, with its already high costs, now carrying this loss-making Air Deccan burden, plus all that debt. It was incredibly vulnerable to this perfect storm.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a really central point in Mallya's counter-narrative about why Kingfisher ultimately went under.
Yes, the role of politics.
Yeah.
Alleged policy hurdles. He claims that right in the middle of that 2008 crisis, when the airline was losing money hand over fist, he went to the government.
Looking for a bailout.
Not initially, according to him. He specifically says he went seeking support to downsize. He wanted to shrink the airline, cut the fleet, reduce routes, make it smaller, more sustainable, to try and survive the downturn and the fuel price shock.
Okay, so he wanted to restructure, cut costs drastically. Makes business sense in a crisis.
Seems logical. But here's where he makes a very specific, and frankly, quite explosive claim. He directly mentions the finance ministry, and the finance minister at the time, Pranab Mukherjee.
And what does he claim happened?
According to Mallya's account in this interview, the government told him not to downsize. They instructed him to keep the airline operating at its current scale.
Told him not to cut back, even when he said he couldn't afford it.
Exactly. Let me find the quote from the source. Here it is. Mallya says, "I was told not to downsize Kingfisher at that time. I explained I can't afford to operate under these depressed economic circumstances. High fuel, low demand. But, he claims, the pressure was on to keep flying."
And how did they expect him to do that if he was losing money?
He says some kind of temporary bank support was arranged, somehow, to keep the airline afloat for a bit longer, despite his warnings about the finances.
Wow. Okay, so the implication from Mallya's perspective here is huge.
Absolutely. He's arguing this decision, made at a high level, driven by what he calls political pressure, forced Kingfisher to keep operating unsustainably.
By stopping him from downsizing early, when maybe a smaller version could have survived, this alleged government intervention actually made things worse, forced them to just burn through cash they didn't have.
That's precisely his argument. Flying planes near empty just to maintain routes and connectivity because of this pressure. In his telling, this political decision wasn't just bad advice. It actively worsened the crisis for Kingfisher, prevented necessary business moves, and ultimately pushed it closer to collapse.
So in his narrative, the failure wasn't just his business decisions, though he accepts responsibility for the overall outcome. It was significantly compounded, he claims, by this direct policy intervention stopping him from making vital survival cuts.
It adds a layer of complexity, doesn't it? It wasn't just market forces or his choices alone, if his account holds true.
It definitely complicates the simple mismanagement narrative, and the downward spiral after that is, well, pretty well known. Late 2011, things got really bad.
Started defaulting on salaries. Employee strikes, which obviously crippled operations further, hurt the brand image.
It just unraveled, culminating in October 2012 when the DGCA, India's aviation authority, suspended Kingfisher's license. Grounded. Permanently. The end of the airline.
And amidst all that, as we said, he has publicly apologized for the failure and specifically for the employees who didn't get paid. He takes responsibility for the business outcome.
Yes, but here's where we get another really fascinating detail from the interview. One that directly challenges that very powerful image of him just abandoning his employees, not caring about their salaries.
Okay, what did he say?
He shared something quite surprising. He said, and he phrased it like, for those who care to listen, suggesting this part of the story gets ignored. He said there was money specifically for employees' salaries lying in deposit with the court.
Money for salaries, held by a court. How does that work? That sounds completely opposite to the idea he just didn't pay them.
Exactly. He claims he had set aside funds, significant funds, he implies, in the Karnataka High Court. And the specific purpose of this money, according to him, was to pay those overdue Kingfisher salaries.
So the money was there, earmarked for employees.
That's his claim.
Yeah.
And he says he applied to the court for permission to release those funds, to pay the employees what they were owed.
Okay. So what happened? Did the court approve it?
This is the absolute crux of his claim here.
Hmm.
According to Mallya, the banks who were obviously involved in the legal proceedings trying to get their money back, the banks objected to him using those funds to pay the employees.
The banks objected to paying the staff.
That's what he asserts. And because the banks objected, he says, the court refused his application, denied him permission to release the money he claims was set aside for salaries.
So the court sided with the banks over the employees, according to him.
That's his narrative. He concludes, sounding quite frustrated in the source's description, there was really nothing I could do beyond that once the court ruled against him.
Wow, okay, wait. If that specific detail is accurate, that is huge from his perspective. It completely messes with the simple story of him just callously ignoring his employees.
It really does. He's claiming he had the money ready, he wanted to pay them, but legal hurdles, supposedly put up by the banks themselves, prevented him from doing it.
It introduces this element of external constraint, legal process getting in the way, that you just don't hear in the common narrative at all.
It adds a whole different dimension. So his view of the Kingfisher collapse, as he presents it, isn't just mismanagement or fraud, it's this convergence. Global crisis, bad timing on acquisitions, yes, but then alleged policy interference stopping downsizing, and then legal blockades, including, he claims, the banks stopping him from paying staff even when funds were supposedly there in court.
So it's a story of a business failure, definitely, but one amplified and maybe even sealed by these external pressures and legal complexities in his telling. Not simple theft from day one.
Exactly, it shifts the focus. Now, beyond Kingfisher, Mallya also used this interview to talk more broadly about the business environment in India, his experiences over decades.
And he wasn't exactly complimentary, was he? He tackled that whole ease of doing business slogan head on.
He did. No mincing words. He flatly called it a myth.
A myth. Strong words from someone who ran huge businesses there.
Yeah, his quote is pretty blunt. There is no ease of doing business in India. It's in the Indian DNA, bureaucratic and political hurdles all along the way. He's basically saying the system itself is inherently tough, regardless of official pronouncements.
And he gave examples, right, from running United Breweries, the liquor giant.
Yes, he pointed out that alcohol is regulated state by state in India. All 29 states have their own rules, licenses, power structures.
So running a national liquor business meant dealing with 29 different sets of regulations.
And 29 different political centers. He made this comment, maybe half joking but revealing, that he had to be in the good books of 29 chief ministers.
Wow, that paints a picture of just how fragmented and politically influenced things could be, especially in a sector like liquor.
Definitely. And linked to that, he spoke about the pressure for political donations, especially around election time. He called the demands completely unreasonable and impractical sometimes.
Implying they were excessive, maybe even coercive?
That seems to be the implication. He even mentioned a tactic he used. He'd often actually leave India during election seasons just to avoid being directly hit up for these large contributions by state politicians or their people.
Leaving the country to avoid donation requests?
Yeah.
That says something about the pressure he felt he was under.
It points to, in his view, this pervasive backdrop of political demands being part of the cost of doing business, especially in certain industries.
Which then brings us to the even more sensitive topic.
Yeah.
Navigating red tape, maybe unofficial payments. Was he asked about bribes?
He was asked directly,
Yeah.
and the source says his response was very careful, very layered. He didn't say yes, didn't say no.
What did he say?
He said, I'm not going to confirm or deny that. I think you know India as much as I know India.
The wry reply, as the source calls it. That kind of says it all without saying it, doesn't it?
It really does. It implies, look, this is the reality on the ground. Getting things done, avoiding problems, often involves, let's say, accommodations that aren't exactly official, greasing the wheels, something everyone knows happens, but nobody talks about openly.
He's suggesting that navigating this unwritten system was crucial, and maybe failing to do so could cause big problems. He finished by saying something like, no matter what the government says, the reality is extreme rules and controls.
Exactly. A gap between policy rhetoric and the lived experience of trying to run a business, in his view. A system prone to interference and demands.
He also talked about how his own image just flipped, didn't he? The hero to zero thing.
Yeah, dramatically. He went from being the celebrated tycoon. I mean, he was a member of parliament, ran sports teams like RCB in the IPL, a Formula One team, rubbed shoulders with top politicians, even sponsored ruling party events he was in.
A national icon, almost.
Absolutely. But then Kingfisher collapsed, and suddenly, boom, he says the same people who cheered me on began painting me as some sort of villain. Total reversal.
And he shared that story about a politician friend.
Right, a really telling anecdote. A politician friend apparently told him privately, look, I can't be seen with you now. If we're seen together, the government will come after us.
So people were scared to even associate with him.
Complete ostracization, he claims, out of fear. He mentioned only a very few, like Kiran Mazumdar-Shah, the biotech head, publicly said anything nuanced or supportive. He reflected, in tough times, you learn who your real friends are.
That really highlights his point about the system turning on you fast. His view seems to be the condemnation went way beyond the business failure, became personal demonization, driven by politics and media.
So his overall critique of the Indian business scene, based on this interview, is that it's not just about markets. It's heavily influenced by politics, complex regulations, and this climate where entrepreneurs can be lauded, then scapegoated, especially when things go wrong, and maybe it's politically convenient. His experience, he argues, shows how these systemic factors, not just his actions, crushed him.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the absolute financial core of this whole thing. The debt, the recovery efforts, and what Mallya dramatically calls the double take, or the recovery shockwave.
Right. The headline number everyone knows. Roughly 9,000 crore owed to the banks, the basis for the willful defaulter label.
But Mallya's defense starts with a really simple statement, doesn't it?
Yeah, very direct. I never refused to pay. He stresses this wasn't him saying, no, I won't pay.
He emphasizes the loans were to Kingfisher Airlines, the public company, not personal loans for his lifestyle.
Correct. He acknowledges he was a personal guarantor, so he had legal responsibility, but he denies fraud, denies refusing to honor the debt through the company.
And he claims he tried to settle?
He says he worked on settlement offers to repay the principal amount Kingfisher owed, but he claims the banks rejected these offers, suggesting they preferred to go the aggressive legal route.
He even brought up someone else questioning this, right? Harsh Goenka.
Yes, he pointed to Goenka publicly asking why Mallya was being treated like a political punching bag if his dues were now reportedly settled through asset recovery, especially when other big defaulters got huge loan write-offs from the same banks without the same criminal pursuit.
Reportedly settled. Mallya really leans into that, doesn't he? This leads to his biggest claim.
The recovery shockwave. This is where it gets incredibly interesting and needs careful listening. He claims the banks and the government agencies, like the Enforcement Directorate, ED, have recovered absolutely massive amounts from his assets.
What's the figure he quotes?
As of early 2025, he claims the total value recovered from seizing and selling his assets and company assets is around 14,000 crore.
14,000 crore recovered? That's way more than the 9,000 crore debt figure usually mentioned.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. This isn't just his number. The source material provides crucial backup here.
Official confirmation. Yes. The source explicitly states that India's Union Finance Ministry itself confirmed in Parliament that as of mid-2021, a total of 14,131.6 crore worth of Mallya's properties and assets had been restored to public sector banks through the ED's actions.
Confirmed. In Parliament. 14,131.6 crore. Okay, now compare that number again to the official debt adjudicated by the Debt Recovery Tribunal. What was that figure?
The DRT determined Kingfisher owed the banks, including interest at that time, approximately 6,203 crore.
Okay, wait. 14,131.6 crore recovered versus 6,203 crore officially owed.
You see it. That's Mallya's double recovery argument right there. He's saying they've recovered more than double the legally determined debt.
So his challenge is?
It's direct. Why the blatant discrimination? He argues, look, unless the ED and the banks can legally justify taking and keeping more than twice what the court said was owed, he should get relief. Relief from the criminal cases, the defaulter tag.
The implication is huge. If they've recovered more than the debt, how can he be accused of theft, of money going missing?
That's his point. Where's the loss to the banks if they've been made whole, and then some, using the very assets he was supposedly running away with?
And these assets were significant, right? Not just pocket change.
No, the source mentions the sale of his very valuable shares in United Breweries and United Spirits, the big liquor companies, high-value properties, even his private jet, attached and sold off legally.
And based on this, he's planning legal action himself now.
Seems so. As of late 2024, he signaled he intends to sue the ED and the banks in India over this gross injustice of recovering far more than the debt.
He even put it out on social media, asking if anyone, even critics, would address this discrepancy.
Yeah, but the source notes that publicly backing Mallya on anything is still politically radioactive in India, even if the government itself confirmed the recovery numbers. So few mainstream voices are touching this double recovery claim.
And he uses this financial recovery argument to push back hard against the specific criminal charges too, right? Like the IDBI loan.
Absolutely. The CBI and ED have focused on fraud and money laundering, especially a 900 crore loan from IDBI Bank to Kingfisher, alleging it was obtained fraudulently and diverted for personal use.
Mallya's response.
Flat denial. I never borrowed a single rupee or stole any money. Again, loan was to the company, approved by the bank's committees and board, not just given to him personally.
And critically, regarding that specific IDBI loan.
He claims the entire loan and interest have been repaid. That specific loan at the heart of a criminal case, he says, is fully settled now through the recoveries.
So his challenge is, if that loan is repaid, and after 9 years investigators haven't proven he personally pocketed the money, how is he still a criminal based on that transaction?
It's a pointed question, and the source underscores a key fact often lost. As of today, there's no conviction against Mallya in any Indian court on these charges. Authorities haven't legally proven embezzlement for personal gain. He insists the money went into the airline, which failed, but he didn't walk away with cash.
So the financial counter-narrative boils down to this. The banks got their money back, plus a lot more, through asset seizures, which fundamentally undermines the theft narrative. It shifts the question dramatically.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final piece. That fugitive label itself, and his reasons for staying away, his fight for what he calls a fair trial.
The moment everyone remembers, or thinks they remember, is him leaving India in March 2016. The image, sneaking away just before the law closed in.
That's the common perception, but Mallya's account is very different. He directly confronts the label. You may call me a fugitive, but I didn't run away.
He claims it wasn't a secret escape.
No, he says he flew on a pre-scheduled visit, a trip planned beforehand, left openly through normal channels. He admits he hasn't returned, but says that decision came later for reasons I consider valid, not as part of a planned escape when he left.
And he makes that distinction again, doesn't he, between fugitive and thieves?
Yes. He essentially says, okay, call me a fugitive if you want. Technically, I'm not there facing charges. But where's the core thief coming from? Where's the chori theft? He accepts the label of absence, maybe, but rejects the implication of criminality.
So why didn't he return after that trip? What are his valid reasons?
He says while he was away, the legal cases against him in India massively accelerated. And then, the crucial step. Indian authorities revoked his passport while he was abroad.
Passport revoked. So he couldn't legally travel back anyway.
That's his point. It effectively stranded him, mainly in the UK. He says, my freedom ended the day they took my passport. Returning then, without a valid passport, would mean immediate detention.
And he felt returning voluntarily, even before the passport issue perhaps, would mean immediate arrest and jail, likely without bail, given the charges and the public mood.
Exactly. A situation he says he wasn't willing to walk into without a guarantee of a fair process to clear his name.
Which led to the long extradition fight in the UK courts, almost 9 years now.
A very complex battle. A UK court did initially rule in late 2018 that he could be extradited based on the prima facie case presented by India.
But it didn't happen. Why did it stall?
According to the source, the process got held up by appeals, reviews, and significantly human rights concerns raised by his lawyers, plus other legal technicalities in the UK system.
Human rights concerns. About what specifically?
Mallya himself points to Indian prison conditions. He claims a UK High Court judge looked at evidence about Arthur Road Jail in Mumbai, where he'd likely be held. And in Mallya's telling, the UK court blocked the extradition, at least for now, on human rights grounds under the European Convention, which the UK follows. Concerns about potential inhumane treatment.
The source notes similar concerns have come up in other UK-India extradition cases.
Yes, it seems to be a recurring issue in that specific legal context.
So he's stuck in this limbo, a fugitive under Indian law, but fighting extradition and essentially seeking refuge under UK law. A nuance often missed.
Definitely. And his core reason for fearing return, he says, is he won't get a fair trial in India. He points to the relentless media trial that he feels has already convicted him publicly.
Making an impartial court hearing almost impossible in his view.
That's his fear. Plus, he highlights India using laws like the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act, FEOA.
What does that act do?
It allows authorities to declare someone a fugitive offender and seize their assets before any criminal conviction. Mallya sees this as flipping innocent until proven guilty on its head, assets taken based on accusation, not proof in court.
So his question is, given the media frenzy and the pretrial asset seizures, who wouldn't be hesitant to walk into what feels like a predetermined verdict?
A powerful point from his perspective. But then, surprisingly, after all this fighting, he did express a conditional willingness to return in this recent interview.
Conditional? What were the conditions?
He stated quite clearly, "If I have assurance of a fair trial and a dignified existence in India, I will think about it seriously."
So, not an absolute refusal. He'd consider it if he gets credible guarantees of a fair, impartial process and assurances about his safety and treatment.
Exactly. He's putting the ball back in the Indian system's court, essentially. Show me I'll get real justice, unbiased process, humane treatment, and I'll consider coming back.
Does he think he'll get those guarantees?
The source suggests he's still skeptical, but the fact he's even saying this might signal he's looking for some kind of resolution, an endgame, if the conditions could somehow be met.
And the personal cost of all this. Years in exile.
The source touches on it. Likely lonely, reputation destroyed, constantly caricatured as the symbol of greed.
But maybe speaking out now, combined with the recovery figures coming to light, offers some vindication for him.
Perhaps. Maybe he feels some are starting to see beyond the headlines, realizing, as the source puts it, nobody deserves to be demonized without understanding the full context.
So wrapping up this section, Mallya argues that yes, he's technically a fugitive due to circumstances partly beyond his control, passport revoked, fear of unfair trial, but he insists he's not a thief. The UK legal battle is his fight for a fair process he doesn't believe he'd get in India right now.
Okay, so bringing this whole deep dive together, it's undeniable that Vijay Mallya's story, when you look at his counter-narrative from this interview, supported by those official facts cited, it becomes much, much more layered than the simple billionaire flees debt story.
From his viewpoint, Kingfisher's collapse wasn't deliberate crime. It was, in his telling, ambition meeting a perfect storm globally, worsened by alleged policy errors here and navigating a tough Indian business climate full of political pressures.
And crucially, he wants you, the listener, to focus on that government-confirmed figure. Over 14,000 crore recovered by banks versus a 6,200 crore adjudicated debt. And the fact that after all these years, no court has proven he personally embezzled funds.
He contrasts the monster image with his apology for the business failure and his claim that legal moves, maybe by the banks, even stopped him paying staff from funds he says were available.
He admits business mistakes, explicitly. "I have no excuses. I take full responsibility for Kingfisher failing as a business." But he draws that sharp line. Being a failed businessman is not the same as being a thief. That's the core distinction he demands you consider.
And he strongly implies he was scapegoated, made an example of, maybe for political reasons because he was high profile, while others with huge defaults perhaps got quieter deals or write-offs.
Raising awkward questions about consistency and fairness in how India deals with large corporate debt and failure. Was the response proportionate or selective?
Ultimately, digging into Mallya's side, based purely on this source material, really drives home why it's so important to hear all perspectives, look at the actual figures, the context, before rushing to judgment. There's always more than one side to these complex stories.
Absolutely. His story, the incredible rise, the spectacular fall, these endless legal fights, it's a truly dramatic and maybe cautionary tale about where big business, politics, and the law collide, especially in India.
And it leaves us, and you, with a really big question to think about. If the government itself confirms that the banks recovered significantly more money, potentially double, than the official Kingfisher debt, does that fundamentally change how we should view the allegations against him?
Does recovering the debt, and then some, negate the original accusations of theft or embezzlement? Or is there still a separate case about how the borrowing happened, regardless of the eventual recovery through asset sales?
What does this whole tangled saga truly reveal about the dynamics between business power, political influence, and the application of justice in India today? Something to definitely ponder after this deep dive.